Hey, welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. I'm your host or hostess, Carolyn Glick, and with me this week, I really have the distinct pleasure to welcome Tony Badran. Tony Badran is a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and he's my go-to guy when I'm trying to find out what's going on in Lebanon, when I want to find out what's going on in Syria. So first of all, let me just let all of you see him to show you that he is, in fact, here. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. Good to have you on the program. I've been trying to get Tony for some time, so I'm really pleased that he joined me. You just wrote an important article in Tablet Magazine. Let me just see if I have the thing here. It's yes, I do. It's called Team Biden and the Syria Playbook on Ukraine. So without further ado, why don't you just sort of sum up a little bit of what your thesis is, and then we can take a deep dive into it, because I think yesterday, we're taping on Monday, March 21st, President Zelensky of Ukraine gave one of the most obnoxious speeches I think I've ever heard anybody give before the Knesset on Zoom, attacking Israel, browbeating Israel, engaging in historical revisionism of the Holocaust and Ukraine's record in the Holocaust. And so there's a lot of scapegoating going on there by Zelensky, by the Americans, by others of Israel. But more to the point, there's a larger story that you pointed out in your article that's going on with Ukraine and Putin and the Biden administration. And it all goes back to what? To our favorite topic, or theirs at least, the Iran nuclear deal. So give us a little bit of background into your analysis.
Sure. So what I tried to show in the piece is that there is a continuum. First of all, let me preface this by saying that I view the Biden administration as just the third iteration of the Obama team.
Absolutely.
And therefore, I mean, it's not a stretch. It's the same people.
Right.
Most importantly, the guy leading the negotiations in Vienna is Robert Malley, who was Barack Obama's point man on the Middle East. And so he's a central figure in implementing Obama's vision for the region, which I had discussed in another article in Tablet, co-authored with Michael Duran, called The Realignment, which described what that vision was that Barack Obama had for the Middle East and for the U.S. posture in the Middle East.
And so can you explain it a little bit? Because that's actually, I mean, I think in order to understand, I had Michael on, I think two episodes ago, and maybe what I had really wanted was to have you both on together. And so we're just going to have to do that now that we're having you both separately. But let's just briefly summarize what the thesis is behind the realignment, which I certainly agree with.
So the briefest way I can put it is that Barack Obama sought to upend America's posture in the Middle East, as it had been traditionally for the last 70 years, and to realign U.S. interests in the Middle East with Iran. As a result, relations with traditional allies like Israel, like Saudi Arabia, even Turkey, would be downgraded, and Iran's position as the preferred or principal partner of the United States would be elevated. That's the short and sweet.
And to what end?
So that's a good question. I am in the process of kind of re-evaluating some of my assumptions about that. Initially, we had discussed some possible motivations for it in terms of rational motivations, if you like. Basically that they thought that alignment with the old traditional alignments that the United States had in the region had placed the United States on a war footing with Iran, and therefore embroiled the United States in multiple wars in the Middle East that were to the benefit of these allies who were kind of using the United States to further their interests, and somehow were poisoning their relationship with Iran unfairly, which could have actually been resolved and could have led to a partnership, a very fruitful partnership in managing the Middle East. I still think that that is definitely true at some level, but I also believe that there is another element to it that is not rational, that is more emotional, identity-based, and that sort of draws this screw towards Iran in a different way. And you saw hints of it in when Barack Obama spoke about, how Iran, yeah, they're anti-Semites, but they kind of use anti-Semitism as an organizing principle and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of other things that are uglier things and things that are related, which is something that Mike and I discussed in the piece, that are related to the reformatting of domestic politics in the United States as well, that are reflected in this foreign policy. But I don't want to get too much into it. I mean, I'm still working this out. But what I said, the point I said about how
I don't know that. I mean, just to add my 2 cents here, I don't know that these things are different from one another. I mean, I don't see these things that you're discussing as distinct concepts. I think that they're part of a longer continuum of thought process or of a responsive process of prejudice. I mean, you can understand why American policymakers, particularly after 9/11, might be looking to get away from some of the Sunni Arab regimes like the Saudis, whose nationals were involved in carrying out 9/11. But although, why would they think that it would be better to support the Khomeiniist regime over Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia was essentially an anchor of U.S. Power in the Middle East? And
right. I think 9/11 I think distorted a lot of people's rational thought process and gave room to those who wanted to push this Iran angle to push this anti-Sunni line in the United States, which gained currency for a long time. I do think that counterterrorism as a general guiding principle of U.S. policy in the region, in the way that it manifested itself over the last 20 years, has been catastrophic for strategic thinking in the United States and for proper understanding of why these alliances matter and the nature of these alliances and the nature of these allies. And like I said, opened a lot of room for people to start planting deliberately misleading concepts, as well as some of them that are just malinformed. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is the short and sweet of it, the idea of sort of moving away from traditional allies toward Iran. That was what I believe was Barack Obama's policy, and the reasons for it are things that I'm working out, but what I explained, I still think holds. So this is an important background to the piece I wrote, because you have to understand this idea of realignment to understand why this is so central. And that's why I'm saying it's more than just a rational geopolitical play. There is something far more emotional and personal and identity based in this, because of the nature of the prioritization of it, of this zeal to get it done, and almost the glee in which they look to enrich Iran and empower Iran and act as Iran's lawyers effectively.
I was thinking about it the other day, just in terms of comparing it to healthcare. Right, that healthcare was the most important issue in the first term for Obama, and then Ben Rhodes said that reaching the deal with Iran was the most important issue for their second term. And I was thinking about them both in terms of Obama's pre-inauguration pledge or pre-election pledge, 4 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America, and each in their own way does fundamentally transform the United States.
Yes.
So yeah. I think that if you're looking at it from his anti-colonialist or anti-imperialist mindset, which is inherently anti-American because of the way that he defines the United States and American power, I think that you can see them in his thought process as two sides of the same coin, transforming the United States at home, changing completely the social compact between the individual and government through healthcare and the nationalization of healthcare, and then internationally by aligning the United States with the foremost state sponsor of terrorism against its allies.
Right. No, I do believe that it is a transformational foreign policy by design. Yes. No, absolutely. You don't mount a revolution on the last 70 years of the United States posture and alliance systems and all the benefits that are reflected in domestic policy and domestic politics in the United States, and not have it be by design transformational. I mean, it goes without saying.
So let's get to your article then.
So yes, so with this in mind, what I do is I draw the common thread that has existed in this triangle of the Obama team, Russia, and the Iran issue, and where it has played itself out. I look at it, I call it the Syria playbook, and I say that it started in Syria. Okay. So this dance between Team Obama and Putin started in Syria. And I trace back the relationship that Obama had with Putin. A lot of people saw that we were somehow at odds with Russia in Syria, because a lot of people believe, especially on the right, which is really funny to me, that somehow Obama really was gung-ho on regime change in Syria. It's absolute nonsense.
Right.
I mean, it's demonstrably nonsense. It's the kind of thing that you can point to and show the reluctance, even in asking for Assad to step down, how long it took and how tortured it was, and everything else that he did and said afterwards, which supports this thesis. But nevertheless, there is this impression in the United States, especially, including on the right, that Obama was anti-Assad and moving against Assad, and then the Russians came in to support Assad, and somehow we were at odds with Russia, or that maybe his weakness invited Russia. That's another kind of maybe contradictory claim. But there are multiple versions. If you actually trace very closely the trajectory of U.S. policy in Syria under Barack Obama, which is what I did at the time, you'll see a very deliberate dance from day one. From 2012, you have an explicit partnership with Putin. Whenever, and this is important too, because this is a pattern, that's why I call it the playbook, right? So this is a play that they're using again today with allies. Whenever allies, NATO allies at the time, and regional allies, urged the president to move in Syria, to lead in Syria, to support the anti-Assad movement in Syria, or with a rationale that this is an anti-Iran policy, right? And everyone thought, because nobody understood the realignment as a guiding principle, everybody thought that this is if Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Israel and everybody kind of is on the same page, what are we talking about? France, Britain, there was a consensus on this. What does Barack Obama do? He brings in the Russians into everything and says, no, you have to go talk to the Russians. You have to go talk to the Russians. And everything, so he was using the Russian veto by proxy to swat away all the allied pressure on him to back this move in Syria.
But can you remind me for a second, because I was trying to remember the chronology myself. Barack Obama was supposed to retaliate when he set the red line.
Yes.
And Assad gassed the Syrians again. Right. That was before Russian forces came into Syria, yes. Correct? So correct. His first use of Russia, when was that?
So I started, it depends like how you look at it. I started in 2012. There was something called the Friends of Syria, which is an international forum of US allies that was trying to operate outside the United Nations Security Council because the Russian veto on the Security Council. So Barack Obama nullifies this new forum by bringing the Russians into it, by saying, no, you have to go to the Russians anyway, right? So that's the first thing on the political level. Then later in 2012 is when he makes that comment about the red line in the chemical weapons red line.
And when did Syria break it? In 2014 and 23? I can't remember when he...
No, so Syria was breaking it incrementally from the end of 2012, but really the big attack happens in August 2013. And that's when Obama becomes really embarrassed, also trapped by his own comment about the red line, which he since has said he regrets the most in Syria. He regrets ever boxing himself in with that comment, and calls his decision not to enforce it his proudest moment in office, that he was able to escape the pressures of US allies who were conniving to get him to get involved in Syria. Now, what he doesn't say in that question is why. It's because that's when the talks with the Iranians were going in full swing. And remember, in November 2013 is when you get the joint plan of action, the interim
deal. And that was when we first discovered that the Americans had conceded uranium enrichment to Iran.
Right. So this is when it's coming. Yeah. I mean, they had, they were shredding. We knew that they were going to shred the United Nations Security Council resolution and so on. So we started seeing where this is going at the end of 2013. So this happens August 2013. There is no way on earth that this late a date Barack Obama was going to intervene in Syria against an Iranian client. So at the time, you'll see there was a lot of there were letters being exchanged between him and Khamenei about Syria and so on, especially in 2014 when you have ISIS coming in. But the point is, he turns to the Russians.
Right. And when was that?
September 2013.
Okay.
So that's when he gets the Russians to deal to get Assad's chemical weapons out. So that's when you know that he and the Russians are dancing together in Syria. And far from Russia being an opponent in Syria, it's actually an ally in Syria. And so, and toward the same objective, which is shielding the Assad regime from all those in the region and in Europe who wanted to take him out.
What's so interesting is that, when you place that together, you see that not only was his urge to appease Iran and to align the United States towards Iran foremost in his mind, but at the same time, it was also trouncing Israel, right? Because he used and abused AIPAC at that time, right, with the red line and the lead up. Right. He knew that he was not going to attack in Syria, and so
he threw it on Congress. That's why he threw it on Congress.
He hung AIPAC out to dry because he said to AIPAC, "Go lobby Congress." This was not an issue that AIPAC cared about, and he forced them to go. And they thought, "Oh well, if we go and we lobby Congress, then maybe Obama won't be abusive towards us." But they didn't realize that Obama was already being abusive towards them when he told them to lobby Congress. That it was all a setup. He set them up.
The whole play to throw it on Congress was a setup, but it was also a giveaway. I mean, that's when you knew, right? He was just trying to dodge responsibility for it. And also, I mean, in 2013, remember, the Israeli Air Force was targeting Iranian weapons shipments, including Russian-made Yachont anti-ship cruise missiles to Hezbollah, and there were Israeli strikes in Latakia and so on in Syria, and the Obama team was gleefully leaking that the Israelis were not getting all of the shipments.
They were also leaking the Israeli attacks. I mean, they kept.
Right, no, that's my point. Yeah, right. And but also saying, not just leaking the attacks and kind of saying, oh yeah, and they didn't get them all anyway, right? So already you saw that aspect of the relationship toward Israel and what was ahead with this realignment posture. So that was a turning point. In November 2013, you get the interim deal. And then in February 2014, Russia moves into Crimea. So what I'm proposing in the article is that this was a form of payment that Putin sought in the Ukraine for the favor in Syria, having seen that the role of Russia is critical for the United States to fend off any attempt to derail its agenda with the Iranians.
It's so funny, right? Because if the major beneficiary, aside from Iran, of the Iran nuclear deal is Russia, which was able to reassert its presence in the Middle East for the first time since it was kicked out in '82. So they're this huge winner, and then they take more, right?
So that's the next step. So now we start to see the initial bites in Ukraine in 2014. In Crimea, in Luhansk and Donetsk and all of that, they start to nibble in the east. And then we move to March of 2015, and when there was a renewed effort against Assad in Syria, and this was at an advanced date. Obama was just on the cusp of getting his nuclear deal with the Iranians, but he had a big problem, right? This Iranian partner of his in the region was basically useless in maintaining in keeping things under wraps, right? So in Iraq already they were getting really badly bled, and the United States intervenes on the side of the IRGC in Iraq. In Syria in 2015, they were getting bled very seriously, and the late Qasem Soleimani goes to Moscow, and they're preparing for the Russian intervention. There is a channel between Robert Malley and the Assad regime, the journalist Nir Rosen, who is carrying messages between the two, and he brings a message to Malley that informing him on behalf of the Assad regime that the Russians are preparing to come into Syria militarily. So the later posture where the administration at the time starts saying, well, oh, we were surprised. This is such a surprising move by Putin. They knew in advance that they were coming in. So
they were fine with that, right? Because they wanted to reward Iran by keeping Assad in power.
They were fine with it because it sealed the deal in Syria that Assad now, which Barack Obama also in 2015 called Syria an Iranian equity that we respect. Now that's safe. The Russians, in other words, are the ones who are going to guarantee basic tenets of the deal and the realignment. So the deal happens in June 2015. Fast forward a couple of months, the Russians are come into Syria in September, and they establish a historic sort of a turnaround that they are now have a base on the Mediterranean, something that they really didn't even have during the Soviet period. I mean, Tartus wasn't really a base. Now it's a base. Now it's a real thing. And so now, and it's on the southern flank of NATO, and it's on the Eastern Mediterranean, which is an important also conduit for energy for Europe. So this is a coup for the Russians. And this also goes against some of the other stuff that's being said today about Russia, about the idea of NATO expansion, and that somehow we put okay, whatever one thinks about that. Also, in 2015, the Obama administration brought the Russians to the Eastern Mediterranean. That's not quite NATO expansion. That's a very serious threat against NATO. And when Turkey twice had brush-ins with the Russians in Syria, and in both times, especially the second time after their intervention, there was a push or a fear that Turkey might invoke Article 5 of NATO to summon common defense. And Barack Obama and pretty much everyone else really in NATO made sure, lobbied like hell to make sure that doesn't happen. And ended up with an Article 4 only, which is like some sort of a solidarity and condemnation, but nothing of no Article 5. So it was very clear, and at the time they wanted the Turks to be weakened in northern Syria because they wanted to wrap up the whole Aleppo situation. So by 2015, so this is late 2015. By early 2016, they're already in talks with the Russians in the lead up to the Aleppo campaign. Robert Malley is talking with Alexander Lavrentiev, the envoy of Putin. There's a lot of talk about exchanging intelligence or not. The Pentagon had to raise hell that no, we can't share intelligence with the Russians. John Kerry was going out threatening the Syrian opposition that they have to remove themselves from Al-Qaeda, otherwise the Russians are going to bomb them to smithereens, etc., etc., etc. So there's a partnership and a dance that leads all the way to the end of the term, and which really caps 4 years of a two-step with Putin in Syria, at the center of which is the protection of the Iran deal, but also of the equities of Iran in the Levant.
Okay, so now let's fast forward for a second to Biden, right? Because that's where we're fighting. Now Russia has invaded Ukraine, and the United States seems to be, I mean, you look at the US media and it's all filled with fear of war between the United States and Russia, the beginning of World War III. But you look at what the United States is doing, and they're pretty clear that no, we're not going to go to war for Ukraine. No, we'll give them the minimum that we can get away with politically. I wrote last week in Israel Hayom that essentially the spinner in the works was Ukraine's resistance to Russia, that Ukraine wasn't, I don't think that they anticipated Ukraine fighting this hard. I don't think they anticipated Zelensky capturing the imagination of Western, of the people of the West with his seeming, with his powerful defense of his country under fire. So I think, they kind of, I mean, they didn't kind of, they essentially invited Russia into Ukraine. When Biden said in late January, if it's a minor incursion, NATO's not going to do anything. And Germany, of course, was acting as Russia's unofficial spokesman in Berlin and in Brussels and in the United States and Munich. So,
and that's the key. Germany is really the key, right? So that's the tell. It predates the start of the war. The real... You
mean the Nord Stream 2
that's correct.
And
that's correct.
Biden's end of Trump's sanctions on the pipeline.
Correct. Once Biden waived sanctions on Nord Stream 2, he basically sealed Ukraine's fate in that regard. The reason why Putin had only taken small-sized bites of Ukraine before, I put them in context with Barack Obama in the deal. But since then, in the 2016 to 2020 period, things really weren't advancing anywhere near what we're seeing today, obviously. So the reason why is because the Nord Stream 2 was his alternative pipeline to feed gas into Europe. Otherwise, he would have to go through Ukraine. You cannot damage and sabotage your only artery to Europe before you build an alternative. So once Biden waived the sanction and they completed the pipeline, that's when he knew now he has something else and he can go in. And in fact, if he destroys the Ukraine infrastructure, which I think he did in part, he started targeting. If you do that, then there's no alternative other than Nord Stream 2, which Biden has greenlit. So that's really the main impetus for it. But again, what is the other priority that the Biden team declared immediately upon entry into the White House is that they're going to get the deal back. Right. They're going to get the deal with Iran back, and to take Iranian assets off of like the Houthis off of the terrorism list, and so on and so forth. So they signaled their priority again, and I think that it would not have been lost on Putin. This sort of juxtaposition of Nord Stream 2 and the reinvigoration of the Iran realignment, that's the common thread, or picking up that common thread that had started in Syria in, let's say, 2013 and was paused under Donald Trump and now was resumed again. So
do you think, I guess maybe I'm speaking non-chronologically, but you mentioned Donald Trump. Do you think that his maximum pressure campaign was making a difference? do you think that it was having a strategic impact in terms of the Syrian regime, in terms of Russia's relations with Iran, or anything else? Or do you think that it was more just a tactical impediment for?
I mean, one of the things we have to keep in mind that the maximum pressure really barely lasted 2 years, right? I mean, we didn't pull out of the deal under President Trump until 2018 anyway.
Right.
The amount of time that was required, and everything kind of happened incrementally. It didn't happen at once. It didn't happen all maximum. It was bit by bit by bit, which was unfortunate because of all the other stuff that was happening. And that other stuff also plays a part in today's narrative because, as
You're talking about the Russiagate,
correct,
the Ukraine impeachment,
right,
obviously.
Right. So there is an instrumentalization of Putin. I in the article I draw a distinction between the actual Vladimir Putin, the head of state of Russia, and quote unquote Putin, right, which became a sort of a political cudgel inside or an instrument inside of U.S. politics since during the Donald Trump years.
Yeah, I actually highlighted it, and I think that it's worth reading just so people can get a sense of it, because I think it's very important and it's a key point. It says, for the Biden administration, unlike for Obama, there are necessarily two Putins. There's Vladimir Putin, the realist head of state. He's a stone-cold killer, to be sure, but he gets a job done in rough spots like Syria, where he helped keep America out of another Middle Eastern war while holding in check U.S. allies and their domestic neocon lobbyists who wanted to drag us into that conflict and spoil the Iran deal. He's a thug, yes, but it takes a thug to ruthlessly pound Islamist terrorists like ISIS and keep the Israeli Air Force grounded. Then there's Putin, the devious monster who hacked our elections to install a puppet in the White House in an all-out assault on American democracy that even some Republicans deplore. Clearly, no compromise is possible with that kind of hellspawn. But if Putin was instrumental in neutralizing pesky U.S. allies of old with his entry into Syria, while Obama conducted the real business with Iran, Putin is equally useful towards Team Obama, towards
that same purpose.
Yeah, towards the same end, browbeating U.S. allies to put in danger by the Iran realignment and to keeping their mouths shut while the 2.0 deal is sealed. So, right. So I think that that's a key point because Israel is being attacked, and we're being told that we're being insufficiently anti-Putin, right?
Yes. Even
though the only reason we have to deal with the real Putin is because Obama put him there in the first place on our northern border. And so, they use the bogeyman Putin against Israel in order, after empowering the real one. And they're doing the same thing in Ukraine.
Yes. So the way you see you see it is in the messaging campaign that they're putting out, right? So the way they're framing their fight with Putin. Okay, it's a fight between democracies and autocracies, right? So they're pegging it to the Putin character as it's instrumentalized in the United States, which is an attack on our election and our democracy and so on. So there's this the club of autocrats versus the club of democracies, and somehow Israel, you're not behaving like a democracy. We should maybe review what common values we have with you. I mean, same thing, goes for the UAE and the Saudis, who are. Should we really consider? I mean, sure, they're autocrats. They would side with autocrats, but you, Israel, too. So this is obviously just messaging, right? So this is it's a campaign. It's an info campaign that's being clearly orchestrated. When you saw, Victoria Nuland say that Israel has to, cannot be a haven for sanctions busting for the. I mean, it's amazing because it's purely a projection of what they're doing with the Iran deal and Russia. The Iran deal makes Iran into a sanctions haven for Russia. They are protecting key investments and a role that the Russians are going to have as part of that deal that is going to get them billions of dollars. And that's what the Russians, in what I call in the article, sort of exquisite Soviet humor, is when they stop these negotiations cold and say, no, here's what you're going to do. You're going to come out and publicly state that your deal is going to actually give us, is going to be waived. There's no sanctions going to be applied, right, on our dealings with the Iranians. I mean, we all know that it's in the deal, but we want to hear you say it publicly. It was Soviet humor. It was classic of the genre, and they get it. And the
well, I mean, I think that's actually a critical point, because here what we're seeing is the lie of the U.S. sanctions regimes, right? I mean, and if you already want to fundamentally transform the United States, what better way to do it than in undoing the United States, undoing the U.S. dollar as a global currency? Because the SWIFT sanctions and the banking sanctions that they're placing on Russia are forcing a lot of countries that otherwise would be happy to remain in the dollar-centric economy to do non-dollar denominated transactions with Russians. I think the Indians, just signed a very large oil deal with Russia that's going to be paid in rubles and rupees. And right. Saudi Arabia just did a major transaction with China that's going to be done in Chinese currency. So, I mean, these are steps that the United States that the United States has instigated by sanctioning Russian banking.
Well, these are hints as to, these are disgruntled allies who are hinting at what could happen. It's not yet. I mean, for the yuan to become a global currency for oil trade is still a ways off, obviously, but the Saudis are clearly signaling displeasure. And the
Saudis are interesting because, unlike the Israelis, the Saudis are very, very vocal. I mean, they're sort of the new Benjamin Netanyahu, right? I mean, the Saudis, and to a degree, the UAE and Bahrain are much more outspoken in their opposition to the Iran nuclear deal than they were in 2015. And they're really making clear that they're headed for the exit. I think you posted on your Twitter feed, and I posted on mine because it was a major thing. So the Saudi foreign ministry said, after the Houthis just attacked another oil installation, yes, don't you dare come to us and tell us we have to increase our oil output.
Right. Exactly. So that wasn't subtle. I mean, that was a very clear thing. It's because oh yeah, we're going to shut down American energy production, and we're going to give the Iranians billions of dollars, and talk about removing the IRGC from the FTO. And hey, if you don't pump more oil, we have to question your loyalty as an ally, Saudi Arabia.
While we're refusing to put the Houthis back on
absolutely.
terrorist organization list.
So it's insulting, but it's deliberate, right? So that's to your point. So in addition to all of this browbeating of allies, at the same time as they're talking about this moral outrage about Putin, there is at the same time their deal guarantees him a bunch of money from the Iran deal, and that the United States is brokering with Russian help. I mean, you can't make it up. So it's really
it's even worse than that, isn't it? I mean, Russia is negotiating the deal on America's behalf. I mean, that's what Ulyanov is doing, the head of the Russian delegation.
Yeah. But he's not negotiating something that Robert Malley doesn't want negotiated.
No, obviously, right? So, subcontract your negotiations with Iran to Russia while you're calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal is kind of amazing, wouldn't you say?
It's incredible cynicism involved in it, and that's the point. I mean, that's also part of what I call the Syria playbook, is that you had during the Obama years an amazing, the duplicity that they can talk out of both sides of their mouths at whenever it suited them, that they can be moralizing, posturing in terms of humanitarianism and saving civilian lives and whatnot. And at the same time, Barack Obama can come down and say, hey, listen, 10,000 people died in the Congo. So why should Syria be a priority? I mean, that's what it is. Like, I'm a cold-hearted, stone cold realist, and I'm not going to be swayed by this emotional stuff. So the point is, they jumped back and forth between these two packs as they saw fit, and they kept everyone off balance as a result, because their focus was zeroed in on the Iran deal, and nothing was going to derail them from that objective. And I think that, if anything, the urgency now is doubled, because they're not going to make the same mistake they did last time. Their problem last time is that their deal came at the tail end of their administration. They didn't have time really to consolidate it. They were planning on doing so, but Donald Trump threw a wrench in the works, and they went crazy. And that's why they were so vocal about the priorities, and that's why they removed the Houthis in the very first few days in office, and they started this negotiation, which you saw anyway, the blueprint of it in Robert Malley's writings and Jake Sullivan's writings and all of these guys. They all had it ready to go, and they're not going to make the same mistake twice. So they're going to do it early, and they're going to seal it early, and they're going to spend the time consolidating it as much.
What do you make of the weird sort of delay that we've been seeing? It was an imminent signing, imminent to closure. That was 3 weeks ago, and it still hasn't been closed yet. What do you attribute that to?
I think just the Iranians are just getting pretty much everything they can, right? So they know they can, and they will, and they're trying to get guarantees and certain guarantees. Now, some of them they can't be given, and I think what the problem for Robert Malley has been to try to explain to these paranoid lunatics in Iran that, listen, these are things I cannot. There are things I can give you. There are things I can bend the law. Things I can gut. There are things I can ignore, not enforce, which is what they did in terms of oil sales from the beginning. There are multiple things we can do, but there are things that are out of my hands. I cannot give you that kind of a guarantee.
You mean like the demand that Iran said that nobody can abrogate the deal when it's over?
Yeah, something like that. And now, incidentally, they found creative ways to give them guarantees. There are reports now that they've basically agreed to keep Iran as a threshold nuclear state as a guarantee, right? Right. So there's a million ways that they've been trying to negotiate to give them what they want in that sense, those kinds of guarantees. I mean, there are other types of guarantees.
The other thing that's weird about that, just for noting, is that if a Republican president is elected in 2024, he comes into office in January 2025, the deal is all but expired by then anyway. So that, if they get this deal through, if they implement it in 2022, then it's basically done, and there's nothing a Republican administration can do anyway. They're
trying to skirt and all kinds of interference as much as possible, and protect it for the remaining 2 years in office as much as possible.
So
So remember, I mean, like you were talking about the things that expired, right? Were it not for the Trump administration in the last minute intervening to invoke the snapback and extend the arms embargo on Iran under the JCPOA, Iran was supposed to be legal for it to lift the arm embargo by October 2020, right? That's under the other. So now, how are we going to deal with that? And incidentally, who do you think is going to be the primary arms supplier to Iran? I mean, if Russia, etc. So there's a lot of things that can still move forward, in very bad ways, and for them to kind of protect the deal in the next 2 years.
So just to sum up, because I want to also touch a bit on Lebanon, of which you are an expert, and if I have you here, I wouldn't want you to go without talking about Lebanon. But what basically your argument, which I think is correct, I mean it's almost inarguable, is that when you look at the totality, both of the Obama Iran policy and the Biden Iran policy, which is just a more radical version of the former, you see that Russia plays a central role as an ally to the United States in advancing America's plan to realign away from Israel, to downgrade and harm Israel and the Sunni Arab states on behalf of Iran, which they want to turn into a nuclear state and a regional hegemon, because they have this concept of what is right, and it involves that. And Russia is an ally in this, and as a result, the United States is willing to respect not only Russia's equities in Syria and transform them into a Middle Eastern power on the Eastern Mediterranean, but also to give them Ukraine.
Yes, in some. I mean, the transactions around the Iran deal and the need to protect it and to concede the elements that Obama promised the Iranians as part of this realignment require this kind of cooperation with Russia, and require Russia's intervention in Syria to protect not just Assad as an Iranian interest, but even the Iranian intervention in Syria at the time, which was floundering. So, and Russia.
Actually, that's worth just pointing out, which was that when Russia came in 2015, we were all pretty gleeful at the course of the war that Assad and Hezbollah and Iran were losing. They were being beaten badly in battle after battle throughout the country, and Russia saved them. And Russia came in and was their air force. They were the ground forces, and they annihilated the opposition, and and induced the refugee crisis in Europe and all the rest of it.
I don't know if necessarily they would have lost the war. It was possible, but they were bleeding, is my point, and it was showing. It was showing that they can't hold areas. They can't really take and hold areas. The Syrian army was depleted. The IRGC and Hezbollah were bleeding badly, even incidentally at the hands of ISIS, because at that time you had the ISIS phenomenon also raging in Iraq, so Hezbollah had to split also in Iraq as well. So there was a lot of stuff happening, and 2015 is also when the Saudis went into the Yemen war. So there's a lot of multi-front attacks on Iranian assets. And that's when the Russians come in, and it's really a protection of these assets. There's still a carve out for Israel to target Iranian assets in Syria through this mechanism, deconflicting mechanism.
But that's Russia. I'm not even sure that the Obama administration wanted that.
But that's the point.
That Netanyahu was able to negotiate with Putin, and I never got the impression that the Obama administration was backing this. Are you on mute now or something?
Right. No. So I mean, it's definitely. No, I'm sorry. I think there was a glitch in my Wi-Fi. Anyway,
okay.
But the point is, there was yes, it's definitely an Israeli-Russian thing, because obviously Russia doesn't need to toe the line that the United States pursue interests independently, and if it and it has very important dealings with Israel, and so everyone understands it, things can be left left. But that's what makes the campaign that seeks to raise tension and friction between Israel and Russia now, very deliberately. That's what makes it so malicious. It's that at the somewhere in it is the desire to see Israel trip and break this relationship and understanding with Russia, and therefore ground the IAF and limit its ability to go after Iranian assets. Remember, when Obama's team was in power, they were putting out talkers all the time about how Israeli attacks in Syria jeopardize American soldiers in Iraq. Because there was a guy, I remember this, it was in the Wall Street Journal, a guy says, an administration official says, you go to a point, and if you start crossing Iranian red lines in Syria, then you can start feeling the brunt of it in Iraq against your soldiers. And of course, the Iranians are playing to that. That's why they're putting out this propaganda that their strike in Erbil was aimed because of aimed at the Israeli spy network, or as a retaliation for an Israeli strike inside Iran. So,
yeah, but we just saw that again this week, which was that the outgoing CENTCOM commander McKenzie said, the strategic genius that brought us the Afghan withdrawal, right? That he said that yes, it's true that Iran is threatening to annihilate Israel. But, Israel has to take into consideration that if it attacks Iran, then it's going to place U.S. forces in Iraq in danger. And I just thought to myself, then why don't you make them leave? You know, I mean, if you're telling me that Israel can't attack Iran's nuclear installations because it'll endanger U.S. forces, what exactly are U.S. forces in Iraq to do? You know, it doesn't make any sense anymore. You know, I don't know if you're still there. Are you still there?
Sorry, yeah, no, I'm still there. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's glitching now. But yes, no, absolutely, it's absolute. That is the talker that you're going to be seeing a lot of. That somehow Israel's action are endangering American interests, endangering maybe American forces, and so on. So this is something. This is an old play. Again, the Syria playbook. This is an old play. None of this is new. None of this script is new at all. So these are things that we've seen, and these are plays that they've run a million times. They don't have anything new or original here. They're going to run the same thing. But the Russians, you know, that's why it was very important for the Israelis not to go, you know, that not to be out front on the Russia thing, especially when the United States is playing a cynical game with the Russians in Ukraine.
So why don't we haven't exhausted the subject, but we don't have a lot more time, and I'd like to talk to you about Lebanon. You know, this is another area, and I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing or if it's a similar thing or it's something totally separate. But just as you have in Iran, this complete denial of reality on the part of the progressive Democrats, on the part of the Obama-Biden team, so too in Lebanon, and this is something that extends also to Republican administrations. Yes. I mean, you could say that Republican and Democrat administrations really since '79 have been obsessed with this notion of a grand bargain with Iran that they simply couldn't accept, that they've never been able to accept any of them. Even Trump, I mean, I had Gabriel Noronha on the program last week, the young man who exposed, you know, all the details of what Mali has already given to the Iranians in Vienna on the show. And even he said, yes, absolutely, the Trump administration believed that the maximum pressure campaign was going to get them a deal with Iran, that's what they thought. And they thought that it didn't succeed because they didn't get a deal with Iran, which I thought was pretty amazing because it's pretty amazingly stupid. But I mean, it shows
some of them wanted it. I'm not sure if it was widespread, but yeah, there were some people.
But all I want to say is that it's amazing how consensual this view is. You know, and obviously it takes on very different concept with the progressives who just want to give Iran the bomb and make them happy and give them Israel, let them swallow up anything that they want and make a deal with the Americans. But then you would have, say, with Trump State Department, even with all of its problematic aspects, you know, the Trump State Department was not the same as the Obama State Department or the Biden State Department. But having said that, they all have this concept that there's a deal to be had with the mullahs, which is just fundamentally a misreading of reality. And I think that there's a similar thing with Lebanon. You know, Lebanon has been, at least since 2007, completely controlled by Hezbollah. And I don't know if you hear me. Right. And yet you have successive U.S. administrations, Condoleezza Rice, perhaps more than anybody else, empowering Hezbollah and pretending that Lebanon and the state of Lebanon, the Lebanese armed forces first and foremost, is a guard against Hezbollah taking over when Hezbollah has control of the LAF. So how do you see this? What do you do? How do you explain this pathology?
Yes, so to tie things up with what I said about the Iran deal, I think in this case it's very obvious, a lot more obvious than even the Iran deal stuff, is that there is no rational thinking here. It's purely emotional. Lebanon is a purely emotional subject matter for everyone in the United States. It has because Lebanon doesn't really matter to the United States in any way. The only way it matters to the United States is because of the presence of Hezbollah. Okay. So everything else, the idea of saving Lebanon and all, that's just emotional stuff. It's not coming from a geopolitical, geostrategic, or national interest point of view. So the question about, you know, all the other stuff about putting money behind the LAF and so on, it's funny because nobody says that the LAF is going to be there in order to do anything against Hezbollah. I mean, it's explicit. No, we don't want the LAF to do anything with Hezbollah, because if it does so, there would be war and the LAF would fall apart. But then you have all these contradictions, again, because this is not rational, this is emotional gibberish, and it proceeds to create categories in Lebanon that are not real. That's the fundamental thing about Lebanon. It's a hall of mirrors. Nothing in it is real, right? So we talk about state institutions. Oh, we can build state institutions. That's a meaningless word. It doesn't have any referent in reality. The LAF is not a national institute. It's just nothing. Like everything else in Lebanon, it's just an amalgam of sectarian interests, pure and simple. And it cannot take action against Hezbollah. So what did they do? They reprogrammed it to become an anti-Sunni terrorist force, right? So this is where the counterterrorism policy and the democracy promotion policy converge with this emotional impulse to actually become a pro-Iran policy in Lebanon, which is what Obama pursued, and which is what, unfortunately, all the Lebanophiles in the Trump administration pursued in Lebanon as well, and which, really strangely, is a lot of Israelis seem to be sympathetic to this point of view about, the LAF and elections and opposition. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about? These things aren't real. Okay, none of these things are real. There's a Hezbollah problem in Lebanon. Hezbollah in that Hezbollah has a massive military base in Lebanon. It controls everything in Lebanon. It's the most powerful actor in Lebanon, and it's about to receive a lot of money as the Iranians get a lot of money from the deal as well. So it's the United States is not going to intervene militarily against Hezbollah. That's to be sure. So really, what it comes down to is as far as the United States is concerned, is just to follow the Saudi lead in that sense. The Saudis understood, look, we don't have anything here. The Iranians have it all. The only thing that comes with putting money in Lebanon is to sustain an order that's run by the Iranians. Thank you, we don't need that. We can cut it off, and we'll cut our losses, and that's it. We'll write it off. The United States never had Lebanon. It was never anything in Lebanon. It just sustains an order that's run by Hezbollah. Now, in as much as it bolsters the realignment strategy, they're happy to do it. But from a non-realignment point of view, a non-Obama administration strategy point of view, it makes absolutely no sense for the United States to continue to underwrite that place. Just let it go. You can put pressure, you can put sanctions, you can pursue Hezbollah's networks worldwide. You can have an aggressive maximum pressure policy against the Iranians, which will also target them. You can do a whole bunch of things. Militarily, kinetically, to address the issue of the weapons that these guys have in Lebanon is something that is going to come up now as a decision for the Israelis as they ponder what they're going to do with the Iranian program and with this missile base on their border and the UAV base on their border. So by the way, I'm not advocating or pretending to tell Israel to do.
The problem for Israel, of course, is that, Hezbollah is a terrorist army, so they place all of their missile launchers inside of civilian apartments. And you have to kill, question. And they're going to have all of their, babies bleeding and mothers crying.
It's not going to be only Lebanese babies, by the way, because of the growth in Hezbollah capabilities. There's going to be, unfortunately, a lot of Israeli babies and a lot of Israeli civilians who are going to get killed in a future war. So I
meant that when Israel attacks. Israel attacks Hezbollah's missiles. I mean, we saw this in 2006.
Yeah.
We see this
They're human shields.
In 1996. We saw this in 1982.
Absolutely.
This is their way of war, is getting children killed and blaming the Jews.
But my point is that, so Israel decides, if it figures out a way that it can continue to live with this while doing tactical strikes elsewhere or dealing with the Iran threat separately, it's an Israeli sovereign decision. What I'm saying is, whatever it is, it should be completely divorced of any illusions that somehow, short of such a decision, whether to go after it or live with it, that somehow we can build these cockamamie strategies of state institutions and opposition and elections and civil society.
But that, of course, is what our brilliant, Generalissimo Benny Gantz was doing a few months ago when he when he was trying to make a deal with the LAF that we give them humanitarian support because we just love the Lebanese people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who the audience for this is, but okay. I mean, okay, great. And then the same thing with this business of the gas deal that the United States is trying to secure from Egypt and to circumvent sanctions on Assad in order to feed energy to Lebanon, to give them a couple of hours of electricity. The point in that is, there was all this talk and winking and nodding that, it might include Israeli molecules of gas because of the Egypt, and everyone was so giddy about it, like somehow they scored some major propaganda point. It's really embarrassingly silly. So all of these things need to be, all of these illusions about, because they're really traps on the part of the Lebanese.
But why is it a trap? I'll just play devil or angel's advocate, however you want to look at it. Is there no hearts and minds policy that Israel could run in Lebanon to try to, and why is that?
For a variety of reasons. First of all, because it has no end game. I mean, hearts and minds to do what? To have people come out and say we're pro-Israel? That's just not going to happen, right? I mean, and then to what end? These guys are going to advocate for peace? I mean, it's the same issue. Assuming these people exist, which I don't know if they exist in any mass at all, but let's say they do, right? Which, by the way, it's incumbent on those who make the argument.
It's all the Lebanese who were protesting in Beirut, and they had
who said
Baby Shark.
But who is okay? But who said that these guys are pro-Israel?
Right? Who are they? They're not pro-Israel. There's no way they'll be pro-Israel.
Who said they were pro-Israel? Nobody said they were. In fact, a lot of them made a point to say we don't have an issue with Hezbollah's weapons. That's not our fight. Our fight is economic corruption, right? And political corruption. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about these things. So I don't see this hearts and minds as having any, I don't see who the audience for it is, and I don't see what the purpose of it is. But if it is just that, Israel is trying to say, okay, look, we're not averse to sending humanitarian aid to the poor Lebanese. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But the idea of lobbying or supporting a policy of, hey, the United States should pay for the LAF so that the LAF can do something about Hezbollah so that we don't have to do something about Hezbollah. That's just delusional. That's the LAF structurally never, ever will lift a finger against Hezbollah.
I think you're right. And I think that there's something terribly unhinged. I wrote about it in my book, The Israeli Connection, and in Shackled Wardy, I write about every week, I think, practically in my columns in the newspapers. There's something fundamentally unhinged about the way that the Americans view the Middle East, about the way that they view Iran, about the way that they view. And I think that you made a point that's extremely important and very, very necessary for us to think about. After 9/11, Bush went out of his way to say that it's a war against terror. That means nothing. It's like a war on guns, right? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Right? Why don't you have a war against forks? These are tools. What is it that you're fighting? And they wouldn't say deliberately because they didn't want to deal with reality. So they just made it all up. And you cannot be a great power if you're not willing to contend with reality. And I think that
there's a duplicity involved in it, I think, here, because I think they understand that that's why they're shifting the goalposts, right? Now it's no longer, the point of the aid to Lebanon and the LAF is no longer to actually take on Hezbollah. Now you use fuzzy words that are completely meaningless. These are weasel words, like to act as a counterweight to Hezbollah. What does that mean?
Nothing.
Explain to me what that means. It means zero. It has no actual meaning or referent in reality. It's just something to sell to Congress to take money. And then when you actually say, well, how do I measure this? They don't measure it in terms of Hezbollah. They measure it in terms of what the LAF is doing vis-a-vis Sunni organizations. And even those they conflate and make up. The ISIS threat, what ISIS threat in Lebanon? What are you talking about? The Al-Qaeda threat in Lebanon? It's ridiculous. None of
it wasn't just that. I mean,
real.
at one point, when was it during the I think it was during the Trump administration that you had LAF forces with U.S. forces fighting with Hezbollah forces,
Absolutely.
right at the Lebanese Syrian border, right?
Yes. Right. I mean, the United States was supplying the LAF with munitions, and the LAF was using that munitions to give fire cover to Hezbollah units. They were in a joint operation. Basically.
Yeah, but you also had U.S. trainers or special forces.
Correct. The trainers were there. The trainers were there. I don't know if they were necessarily on the field of battle, but one of the things I did hear is that the LAF were contacted at one point and told, look, this is very overt, and it might actually create a problem in our ability to continue to supply you.
And look, it didn't, right? I mean,
right.
I reported about it at the time. I think you did, and other. I think Seth Franson at the Jerusalem Post reported about it at the time, and who cares? Let's just let's increase our aid to the LAF.
So it's two things, right? And the duplicity helps because you can switch back and forth, right? On the one hand, it's the emotional impulse, and on the other hand, they sell you things like counterweight or long-term investment strategy and things like that. And then they'll start shifting the goalposts.
Like gold, right? Invest in gold, right? You get,
as need be. Well, I mean, gold is actually tangible. There's nothing tangible.
But you could, but it's, you can pretend. You can say it's a commodity.
Right. But it's not. It's just thin air, right? That's the whole point, right? Well, if you don't, then Hezbollah will complete its takeover, or the Russians will somehow move in, and there's a. Well, okay, so what? Let the Russians move in. Who cares? I mean, not assuming they do, right? I mean, which is not a proven assumption. But they start shifting goalposts and moving from one argument because it's not rational. It's an emotional appeal, and ultimately, it's a hustle. That's what it is. It's a scam. Unfortunately, there's a lot of constituents in the United States who are pushing for it, and there's a lot of people in Congress who unfortunately buy it. There are a lot of people.
So let me ask you a question, because I know you have to go, and I don't want to keep you too long beyond.
Incidentally, I made a mistake about INARA. It's the Nuclear Agreement Review Act. I misspoke, but there you go.
Okay. So you just warned me ahead of time that you were going to have to leave fairly soon. So sure. I don't want you to just run off mid-sentence. So let me just ask you a question. What do you advise Israel when we look at the Biden administration? And what do you advise Congress when you look at what the Biden administration is doing vis-a-vis Iran and Russia, vis-a-vis Lebanon? I mean, what is your sort of word for the wise, whether you're talking to the Israeli government or you're talking to Congress, trying to figure out how to handle this, how to mitigate the dangers, how to minimize the dangers that this out of control, very radical administration is working assiduously to promote?
So, I mean, I'm obviously my position is not as an advisor to the Israeli government, but it's
or to Congress.
But yes, my point is, my job is to write analysis that clarifies. Okay. What I think it does clarifies. So, in what I did with the Ukraine-Syria piece, is to kind of connect dots, because a lot of people, they're very busy, and there's a lot of subterfuge and a lot of messaging and disinformation and misleading tricks and so on. So there's a lot of noise, and the way I see my job is to kind of cut through that noise and just connect dots and present that. And when people see that, then maybe if they had misconceptions, if they had misunderstandings, if they maybe they had suspicions but weren't quite sure, why is the United States doing this? They cannot possibly be serious. One episode I remember from 2015 involves Yaakov Amidror, who came in the summer on the eve of the deal, came to Washington and wrote about it at the time in Israel Hayom, and he was surprised. He couldn't believe it. He was talking to people at the State Department who were talking to him about, some sort of a special relationship between the United States and Iran. And he was like, what? This is insane. How is this possible? Because they couldn't entertain that the United States would act in this manner. right? So there's a disbelief and an inability to digest that such a thing could be considered on the part of this particular faction in the United States, which currently holds power. So my job is really, more than anything else, is to lay it bare and clarify it so that people can say, no, all of these assumptions that we're making were wrong. And maybe we need to review our assumptions and our bets and adjust what we do in the math. Now, it doesn't necessarily always lead to change. Like, it's not clear that necessarily Congress will be able to stop a deal if the United States, if the administration moves, right? So whatever one advises Congress or not, it doesn't necessarily change that fact. So, but in the context of Lebanon, which is where I work closely, including, briefing and on the Hill and stuff like that, that's where the same approach, I use the same approach, is like, you need to stop with the delusion. You need to stop, these words and these things that they're saying, you have to stop and parse them because they're painting a picture of reality that is not real. And that's kind of how I see so in the same way, my analysis about what I just said about Hezbollah and Lebanon to, from the vantage point of Israel is that, look, if you think that, the LAF is going to put a stop to Hezbollah or elections or civil society or any of that nonsense, you are making a bad bet. Now, I'm not telling you you should do this, or this is not my place. I cannot possibly presume to tell anyone to do anything like that. But whatever your decision ends up being, right, whoever you are, whether it's in the United States or in Israel, it has to be based on reality. And I see my work as an attempt to clarify that to the best of my capability.
Well, I think you do a very excellent job. You did an excellent job in your latest article at Tablet. I try very hard to read what Tony Badran writes, and all of you out there in podcast world, you should do the same, because I think, one of the things that is so stunning, and it's even now, and I've been doing this for, so many years, is it's hard to get your head around, is just how major a role delusion plays in foreign policy making in Western democracies led by the United States, and just how devastating that is for all of our security and future. I remember I think it was Claudia Rosette back in the early 2000s, when she was still writing for the Wall Street Journal. I don't remember what her column was called, but it had something to do with reality. And it's true, we all keep going back to this. Yes, but there's reality, and then there's your theory, and reality is actually more important. Why don't you give it a try as a basis for your policy making? And what we're finding with Biden, and we're finding with obviously we found it with Obama, we're finding it with this Israeli government, which is absolutely horrible, and we're finding it really, we found it to a degree in all U.S. administrations since the end of the Cold War, and even during the Cold War, is that delusion plays a huge role in deciding how people are going to act. And so I thank you very much, Tony, for your role in keeping it real. Keeping it real. All right. Well, we're going to have you back, and maybe what would be really fun is to have you on with Mike, and maybe Gotti Taub will make a cameo appearance as well, and so we just get the whole band together, Sure, that'd be great. I'll do lead vocals, and you can do bass, because you're like the jazz guy, right? So
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you again soon, and thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
And keep up the excellent work.